Okay, hi BookTube, Aaron here, thanks for dropping by. We're about halfway through the year and I thought I'd do the mid-year book Freakout tag. I did it last year and I thought it was a nice way to evaluate how things are going and how you might want things to be going for the rest of the year. I like the questions and everything, and a few people have done it and I've enjoyed seeing what they've had to say. Let's get into it. So it was created by Chami and Ellie. I don't believe the original videos are still up on YouTube. If I can find them, they'll be down in the description. So the first prompt is best book you've read so far in 2022. And for me, that would be War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. There are a few other contenders there for me, but really just for the depth of experience more than anything else. There's just so much in there, and I just really loved it and just felt so immersed in the world of these books and in the characters and how they were developing and how they were actually questioning themselves and growing and all these sorts of things. I just thought it's a really wonderful book. Then number 2 is the best sequel you've read so far in 2022. And I haven't really read that many series, and so I didn't really have much competition for an answer to this one. But I thought I'd go with the Two Towers, even though technically it's not a sequel, since really the Lord of the Rings is just one novel, but it's the closest thing that I had. And then numbers 3 and 4, I don't really have answers for. So number 3 is a new release you haven't read yet but want to, and then number 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I don't really have any books in mind for either of these, and I think I'm really going to be concentrating on sort of backlisted books and classics that I just want to get to in the second half of the year. I have read a few newer books earlier on in the year, so I think I'm going to concentrate on some classics and some books that aren't quite hot off the press. Then number 5 is biggest disappointment, and for me this was St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves by Karen Russell. This actually featured in this tag when I did it last year, as a book I wanted to get to later on last year, and I actually ended up reading it in January of this year. And yeah, it had been on my shelf for quite some time, and I thought it'd be a fun sort of quirky, maybe sort of middle grade or young adult fantasy short story collection, which it was, but there was just something about it I just didn't like. Maybe it was her writing style. I found it to be a little condescending in some ways as well. I don't think I would have really appreciated that much if I was a teenager reading this. And I think the stories were just kind of trying too hard, but also not trying hard enough in terms of anything actually really happening. And so it was quite a disappointment, to be honest. Although I don't know whether I'd pick up another book of hers or not, because she does have real promise and a real she just have a voice as a writer, and it can be very enjoyable. So maybe I'd try something else, but I wouldn't rush to read it. And then number 6 is biggest surprise, and for me it wasn't necessarily a surprise that this book and this author would be good. Just as more of a surprise that if it affected me the way it did, and that this author really kind of became as important to me so quickly after reading them. And that would be Albert Camus, The Outsider, which was the first book that I read this year. And I just thought it was amazing. And almost as soon as I'd finished it, I picked up some more Camus. So I've got this volume, which includes The Plague, The Fall, Exile and the Kingdom, and some selected essays. And I can't wait to get into more Albert Camus. And I just love the way he sees things, and he's a cracking writer as well. And I just can't wait to get into some more Camus, hopefully later on this year. And then a favourite new author, or a new favourite author, I suppose. So this can be a debut or a new to you author. And for me, it'd be one of the authors I read earlier this year when I was reading books for the BookTube Prize, and it would be Laszlo Krasznahorkai, who's a Hungarian writer, and I read this book, Chasing Homer, and I've picked up a few other of his books because he, kind of like Camus actually, he just has this dark sense of humour, a rather bleak outlook at life that I appreciate and find interesting and insightful, and so I've got a few other of his books sitting around, and hopefully I'll get to them before too long. Okay, where are we up to? Cool. And then number 8, newest fictional crush. This is one that I'm pretty sure I must have dodged this year, but I'm not going to dodge it this year. For me, it would be going back to War and Peace, and it would be none other than Natasha Rostov, who is just just an amazing character, and just from the first time you meet her, you just feel just so full of youth yourself as you're reading, and then she grows up and she goes through all sorts of stuff, and she's just an amazing character, and it was great to get to know her and many of the other characters in War and Peace as I was going through it. Okay, and then a newest favourite character, and I go with a character that I suppose I met fairly recently when reading. So I recently read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and for me, I was thinking of the character Septimus, whom I don't know whether other people might find a bit weird or maybe even annoying, but he's this character who has been in the First World War, and now he has PTSD, and he's he's seeing things, and he's sort of having these weird visions and flashbacks and all sorts of things. But really, what really I found engaging and moving and fascinating about Septimus was this notion that he was kind of an outsider, that essentially he didn't fit in the world anymore, and because of that, the rest of the world had rejected him, and that was just so heartbreaking, and I was really sort of feeling for Septimus, and Virginia Woolf just kept on pushing this idea, and it gets really intense for him, and sort of unbearable, and so that'd be my newest favourite character, in a weird way, just because of how much I felt for him, and in some ways can relate and see where he's coming from, although in other ways I could never really relate. And then a book that made you cry. So I don't normally cry that much when I read, but I would be lying if I didn't say I didn't at least choke up a little bit as I finished off Lord of the Rings, and as I was reading Return of the King just towards the end. I just couldn't help it. And then number 11 is a book that made you happy. And again, this is a bit of an odd choice maybe, but this is one I read very recently as well, just a few days ago. This is Memorial by Alice Oswald, one of my favourite contemporary poets. And this is it's not a translation at all, but it's an excavation of the Iliad. So she's taken the Iliad in the Greek and she's written through it, and she's left out some passages, and really it's just a list of names and of the way they died, and then she'll give a simile, and she's kind of showing how in the original Greek the similes that Homer is using are connected to agriculture and to sort of pastoral lyric poetry, and she does a cracking job at this, and it kind of sounds boring. It's just a list of people dying, and then some kind of simile to either the way they died or the sort of setting around them as they died. But it's just so compelling, and I'm not sure if it helps to have read the Iliad or not, because it's really compelling and evocative, the way she pulls it off, and just her command of simile and of language was just so satisfying that I just couldn't help smiling, even though she's writing about people dying. It was just amazingly done. And then the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year, or the most beautiful book you've received so far this year. And I've shown this off recently in a library tour. It'd be The Monk by Matthew Lewis. And I've got this lovely little folio society edition of it. But I thought I'd just show it off again. I mean, just initially, from the outside, it just looks really nice, really lovely. I really like this pattern. And then as you go inside, it just captures the feeling of the book really, really well. I just think that's great. And there are lots of really great illustrations as you're going through as well. I'll just find you at least one. Oh, there's one of a... well, actually, it's people. It's like a procession through a church, and there are people sort of praying and pleading there. But it also looks a bit like a church burning down at the same time. The Monk by Matthew Lewis, and I haven't read this edition yet, and I'm really, really looking forward to, because I think it'll be a really enjoyable experience. I'm just gonna, there we go, put that in the box. And then the last question for this is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I don't really have any strict goals here. I do have I'll try and show it in the back of this notebook. I make a little list for every year, and these are just if I have no idea what I want to read. It's a list of things I do want to read, and it's just there so I remember. And I've managed to get quite a few of those off, if you can make out the ones that I've checked out there. But I thought I'd just try and keep it simple so I don't have too many books here. And first up, I'd really want to read some more Kafka this year. And I want to try and make it a thing that I at least read one work by Kafka, at least a story or something by Kafka every year. But I've never read any of Kafka's novels, and so I want to at least read The Castle this year. I think it was on this list last year, and I ended up reading something else by Kafka last year, so I'd like to read The Castle by Franz Kafka. I'd also like to read The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. In fact, I've just made a little bit of progress in it, so I want to carry on and finish The Magic Mountain this year. I'm sure I'll do it in 6 months. I'm also currently reading Remembrance of Things Past by Marcel Proust. I'm currently just nearly at the end of the first volume, and I'm sure it'll take me the rest of the year, probably longer, to finish it off. So that's going to be an ongoing project for the rest of the year. So there's 2 volumes in here, and then we have a further 2 volumes here, and then annoyingly and not quite the same sort of edition, we have the last 3 volumes here. So I'm going to be finishing off Remembrance of Things Past, or at least making more progress. I also want to reread some Sylvia Plath. It's been a couple of years since I've sat down and read an entire book of hers, and ideally I'd love to read both The Bell Jar and Ariel at some point this year. So yeah, I'd love to reread some Sylvia Plath. And while we're on the subject of rereading, I'd also like to reread Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter, because it's been ages since I've read this. But I really enjoyed it the first time, I think. I know I enjoyed it, I just can't remember much of it. So it'd be great to revisit this. And then just 2 more. It's actually quite a lot of books. I want to read Mansfield Park by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July, because it's the only of Jane Austen's major novels that I haven't read yet. And then finally, maybe it's not a new release, it's been out for quite a while now, and I picked it up quite a while ago and it's just been sitting around. Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, and yeah, I'd like to give it a go. It shouldn't take too long to read. I just haven't made the time for it yet. And I've never read anything else by Susanna Clarke, so we'll see if I like it. And that wasn't actually the last one. I'm going to be finishing with this. At the end of this year, I want to read Dubliners by James Joyce. And I know I've read some of the stories before, but I want to do the thing where you're reading a story a day in the lead up to Christmas, and then you read The Dead on Christmas Eve. So that's going to be my little advent calendar, I suppose, for sort of mid-December, is to be reading a story from Dubliners every day. So there we go, there's my mid-year book Freakout tag for 2022. It's a bit crazy how fast the year's going, but that's how it is, I suppose. And let's see if I stick to any of my plans. If you haven't done this yet, I'd love to see you do it. It's always really fun seeing how people are doing, and yeah, just watching them freak out a little bit. But there we go, I'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.